Well, today I'll be talking about my top 10 favorite metal albums of 1994. I've also done a top 10 metal albums list for 1993, and I believe I've also done one for 1990, 1989, and 1988. So if you haven't seen any of those videos, make sure to check out those videos after this video right here. But yeah, 1994 to me is one of the best years of the 90s. Many notable releases from that year, from bands like Soundgarden, Pantera, Machine Head, Prong, Dream Theater, and many other bands. If I were to name some honorable mentions, I'd probably point to albums from Slayer, Nailbomb, and Biohazard. Those are some that come to mind. So yeah, State of the World Address, Divine Intervention, and Point Blank. But yeah, also really great albums. But as of now, this is probably my top 10. Of course, this is a list that could change at any time, but as of now, this is probably my top 10, and this will be in no particular order. But the first album I do want to talk about is from one of the leading bands in the world of melodic death metal, At the Gates, with Terminal Spirit Disease. You could maybe say that this album is somewhat overshadowed by the album that would come after this one, Slaughter of the Soul. Definitely a landmark album in the world of metal. Highly influential, especially to metalcore, 2000s metalcore. But yeah, Terminal Spirit Disease, kind of an underrated album. I think you get some of the band's best work on here, such as songs like The Swarm, the title track, and Forever Blind. Forever Blind, to me, being one of their most underrated songs. I'd say the same thing with The Fevered Circle, another really good song off the album. The Beautiful Wound has some really good riff work, I'd say. But yeah, really dig this album. Definitely one of the band's best, in my opinion. And of course, if you haven't heard it, definitely check it out. But the next album on my list is from Corrosion of Conformity, their album Deliverance. Maybe their most commercially successful album. You have some of their biggest songs on here, such as songs like Albatross and Clean My Wounds. But yeah, also have some really good deep cuts in the album. Songs like the title track. I really like 7 Days, especially the guitar work. Broken Man's also really good. Heaven's Not Overflowing, to me, is one of the band's best album openers. Yeah, all around, definitely a great album. One of the band's best, along with other albums like Wise Blood, Blind, and America's Volume Dealer. So let's go ahead and move on to the next album. We'll be diving into the world of progressive metal, one of the more popular bands in the genre, Dream Theater, with their album Awake. Honestly, this album and Images and Words kind of fight for being my favorite Dream Theater album. I'm sure a lot of people would probably point to Images and Words, and I have seen some love for Scenes from a Memory. I know a lot of people point to that album as their favorite too, but I don't know, it's kind of tough. You definitely get multiple answers when it comes to favorite Dream Theater album, but I mean, for me, again, either Images and Words or this album. But yeah, with this album, they go a bit darker, and this is probably one of their heaviest, I'd say, too. But some of my favorites on here, 6 O'Clock, definitely one of the band's best album openers, and probably one of my favorite Dream Theater songs in general. You also have Caught in a Web. Absolutely love that song. Was definitely really happy when they performed that song when I saw them live last year. Innocence Faded and Lifting Shadows Off a Dream. Those two songs, I think, have some really solid vocal performances from James Labrie. Erotomania, maybe one of my personal favorite instrumentals from the band. And then you have Scarred, which is the big epic on the album, and maybe one of my favorite epics from Dream Theater, and I think a tad kind of underrated. You also have Lie, which is one of the bigger songs on the album, and also one of my personal favorites. And you also have The Mirror, which might have some of my favorite riff work on the album. But yeah, absolutely love Awake. Definitely probably a top 5 metal album of 1994, I'd say, for me personally. Absolutely love that album. Really good stuff. But now I'll be moving to one of the first bands I ever got into, Korn, with their self-titled debut. Honestly, nowadays it's tough for me to pick a favorite Korn album. It could be either this one or Follow the Leader, or maybe even Issues, honestly. I love Issues too, but can't go wrong with their debut, though. Definitely one of the best debut albums in the world of nu metal, and Korn is definitely one of the leading bands in the genre. And yeah, still holds up to this day, in my opinion. I mean, Some of my favorites on here being, of course, Blind, which still goes hard to this day. I also do like Faggot and Chutes and Ladders. You move towards the deeper cuts, I really love Fake, and Helmet in the Bush is another one of my personal favorites on the album, especially when it comes to the second half. And you also have the album closer, Daddy, which is a song that I probably heard at probably too young of an age. I mean, I got into Korn before I even entered middle school. I think I discovered Korn around, I don't know, around 4th or 5th grade, maybe somewhere around there. But yeah, again, probably heard that song at too young of an age. But Korn and Linkin Park were really the bands that really pushed me into getting into rock and metal. But yeah, still love this album to this day. I'll always have a soft spot for Korn, especially those first 4 albums. But yeah, still awesome. But let's move on to the next album, Burn My Eyes by Machine Head. Now, when it comes to Machine Head, when fans pick their favorite album from them, it's either going to be this one or The Blackening. Blackening would be in close second for me, of course, but this album has to be at the top. Absolutely love this album. Probably one of the best debut metal albums of the 90s, I'd say. So many killer songs on here. Some of my favorites being Davidian, which is, of course, one of their big anthems. Old is another one of my favorites, especially one of my favorites when it comes to the band's singles. Move towards some of the deeper cuts. I absolutely love 1,000 Lies. Definitely one of my favorites on here. I really like Block. That's probably a contender for maybe being my favorite album closer from the band. I also really like A Nation on Fire. Not talked about as much as some of the other songs on the album, but I really like A Nation on Fire. And then you also have Death Church, another highlight on the album for me, and probably another one of my favorite songs from Machine Head. But yeah, Burn My Eyes definitely has to be here. Definitely one of the best metal albums of 1994. But now we'll be moving to one of the big 4 of American thrash, Megadeth, with their album Euthanasia. Yes, with this album, it's a bit more radio friendly, a bit more melodic, especially compared to some of their other albums, such as albums like Killing Is My Business or Rust in Peace, So Far So Good So What, and of course many others. But even with all that, I still personally really dig this album. I think this album's actually a tad underrated. I mean, Atoll Lamone is, of course, a song that definitely gets its share of attention, but I feel like the rest of the album is somewhat overlooked, especially certain songs. Some of those being I Thought I Knew It All and Family Tree. I also like Addicted to Chaos. Elysian Fields is probably one of my favorite deep cuts from the band. And I also would say with Euthanasia, I think it gets some of Dave Mustaine's best vocal performances in the Megadeth discography. But yeah, Euthanasia, another pretty good album from Megadeth in my opinion. Again, might not be as heavy or as thrashy as some of their other stuff, but still, I think at the end of the day, it's still a pretty strong album. But next we're moving to the world of death metal, one of the OGs in the genre, Obituary with World Demise. Another album that I feel is pretty underrated. I mean, when it comes to Obituary, most people talk about albums like Slowly Rot or Cause of Death. Cause of Death is still at the top for me as my favorite Obituary album, but honestly, this album is probably my second favorite. I'm one of the very rare people that would put this above Slowly Rot or even The Incompletes when it comes to my personal enjoyability and, of course, stuff like that. I don't know. I personally really dig this album. I mean, I do like the production from Scott Burns, of course, and I think this album has some really good deep cuts. I think this album does have its share of songs that are kind of slept on. I mean, when it comes to the more lesser-known songs on here, I really like Solid State and Boiling Point. I really like Redefine. That's probably another one of my favorites on the album. But of course, the big song on this album is Don't Care, which is the song that starts off the album. I mean, that song just goes hard, and that has to be one of my favorite Obituary songs. That song for me just never gets old. But another standout for me on the album is Killing Victims Found, which I believe is a bonus track on one of the editions of the album, maybe a remaster or something like that. I can't remember, but either way, that's another pretty underrated song from Obituary. But yeah, World Demise for me has to be on this list. Really dig that album. But now we're moving to one of the biggest metal albums of 1994, Far Beyond Driven by Pantera. I mean, you can't talk about metal in 1994 without mentioning Pantera or this album. I mean, you have some of the band's best known songs on here with 5 Minutes Alone and I'm Broken. And I do like their cover of Planet Caravan. Of course, I do also like the original from Black Sabbath, but I do think Pantera did a pretty good job with that cover. You move towards some of the lesser known songs on here. I really like Use My Third Arm, probably one of the heaviest songs on the album, and again, one of my personal favorites. I also like Shedding Skin, especially the riffs in that song from Dimebag. Strength Beyond Strength is definitely a banger and a strong way to open up the album. That song definitely goes hard. But yeah, all around, definitely one of the best albums of 1994, really in general. But next we're continuing the whole groove metal thing with Prong, with Cleansing. Probably their most commercially successful album. You also have their biggest song on here with, of course, Snap Your Fingers, Snap Your Neck, but you have other really great songs on here like Another Worldly Device, which is a contender for maybe being my favorite album opener from the band. Whose Fist Is This Anyways, or Whose Fist Is This Anyway, another fan favorite off the album and another highlight for me on the album. I also really like Cut Rate, which picks up the tempo a bit more, one of the more faster songs on here, and yeah, I also really dig that song. Same with Broken Peace. Broken Peace is also really good. Fairly solid mid-pace rockin' song. I really like that one. Test is also pretty good. And when I saw Prong with Obituary and Black Label, I believe they opened their set with Test, which I did not see coming at the time. But Test, another really good song off the album. Probably another one of my favorites. But yeah. When it comes to a front-to-back listen, this album is probably my favorite from Prong. And they have other really great albums too, like Beg to Differ, Prove You Wrong. I think their latest album, State of Emergency, is also one of their best. And you also have Carve Into Stone, which is another one of my favorites when it comes to their more modern work. But yeah, Cleansing definitely has to be on my list. Another really good album. But let's go ahead and move on to the final album for this video. Promised Land by Queensryche. So yeah, with this album, the band goes in a more darker, more moody, more atmospheric direction, and might not work with every fan, but for me, it works. I mean, now you definitely get a variety of opinions on this album. For some people, this is the beginning of the band's decline, which of course I disagree with. And then you also have the other fans that view this as the last really good Queensryche album, and I would probably agree with that, at least up until Todd would join the band. And I like the album that they've done so far with Todd LaTorre, but yeah, Promised Land, definitely a really good album. It might not be for every fan. It's not as energetic or maybe not as heavy as some of their other albums, but I personally dig it though. I mean, IMI is probably one of my personal favorites on here. One of the more well-known songs off the album. Damage, one of the heavier songs on the album. I also like that one. Out of Mind, one of the more moody songs on the album. One of the more melodic ones, but that's probably another standout for me. I also like Bridge. Disconnected is another one of my favorites. Not talked about as much as some of the other songs on here, but I personally dig that one. You also have the title track, which is the longest song on here. You can maybe say the epic on the album, and I like the moody, atmospheric vibe of that song. It's fairly dark, fairly moody, and I personally really dig it, especially Jeff's vocals in that song. That song probably has some of Jeff's best vocals on the album, I'd say. Really good song, I'd say, but My Global Mind's also pretty good. That song is probably the song that comes the closest to sounding somewhat like something from the last album. That album, of course, being Empire, but My Global Mind, another solid track, I'd say. But yeah, Promised Land, another really strong album from Queensryche, in my opinion. But yeah, that is my top 10 favorite metal albums of 1994. Let me know your thoughts on my list here. Do you agree or disagree with this top 10? Let me know if any of these albums are in your top 10. Of course, let me know your top 10 favorite metal albums of 1994 in the comment section below and all the good stuff. But anyways, thanks for watching. Please leave a comment and a like, subscribe. Have a nice day, and Take care.